What did I just say? Hey everyone, it's Jeremy Steiner, and it's getting to be the holiday season, which means holiday renders. Now, whether you're working on environments or doing some motion design, you can count on there being ornaments. Since we're all accustomed to making material balls, I thought it'd be fun to make some holiday ornaments 100% in Substance Designer. Let's get started. Okay, so here's an example of what we're going to make today. You see I've got the ornament here in our 3D view, and I can rotate the light. You can see the reflection and the metalness with the glitter and the snowflake and the snow. You can see we have just a couple of components here that we're going to add together and then do a little bit of roughness and albedo and metallic stuff at the end. So let's get started. I'm going to go to File, New Substance, and I'm going to use the PBR Metallic Roughness template. And let's call this Holiday Ornament. Size mode absolute with the width at 2K, so 2048 by 2048, and 16 bits per channel. Hit OK. So to get the sphere here in our 3D view, go to Scene and choose Sphere 2 Tiles. So to set up our graph, I'm going to create what I call a final blend. And that allows me to create one blend node that you can hook up to, and then hook that blend node up to our normal, our ambient occlusion, and our height outputs. So it makes it a lot easier to connect things and see them in the 3D view. So I'm going to start by hitting spacebar and bringing in a blend node. And then I'm going to connect it to the normal conversion node. And I'm going to delete these two uniform colors here that come with the template connected to our ambient occlusion and our height outputs. I'm just going to click and drag from our new blend into the height. And then I need to make an ambient occlusion node. This will convert our height information into ambient occlusion information, and we're just going to connect these up here. So it goes new blend into the ambient occlusion conversion node, and then that node goes into the ambient occlusion output. And so we've got these three connections here from our final blend. I'm just going to right click on our new blend and add a comment, just so we know that this is our final blend. So now all we have to do is connect our height information to the foreground of this blend, and it will appear in our 3D view. So let's start off by making our snowflake. And the first thing I want to do is create a shape. So I'm going to hit spacebar, shape. And the idea here is to create some sort of geometrical patterns. So I'm going to take this shape, and it's automatically set to square as the pattern. I'm going to scale it down. So I'm just going to drag the scale parameter, something like 0.87. And then what I want to do is scroll down to the angle, and I can adjust this. And you'll notice as I rotate this, the shape node automatically tiles. So if I hit spacebar in the 2D view, you can see this is continuing to tile. And we just want to create this sort of kaleidoscope-like effect. So I'm going to set mine to 66 degrees here. And then after the shape node, I'm going to hit spacebar and bring in a mirror grayscale. And with the mirror grayscale, I'm going to go to mode and choose mirror corner. So because we have our corner type set to top left, everything in the top left square of our texture is going to be mirrored across. So now I'm going to add a transform 2D. And the transform 2D tries to tile just like our shape does. So if I grab one of these handles and rotate it, you can see it's continuing to repeat just like it did in our shape node. And this way what I can do is I can rotate it some more. Then if I press Control and left click on one of these handles, you can see it does the same thing on the opposite. I can squish this in, and we're really just trying to find all of these shapes, these really cool geometric patterns. So I think I got some cool patterns. Now what I want to do is I'll just drag these over to make some room. I want to do the same exact thing I did before. So after the transform 2D, I'm going to select that, hit spacebar, and get another mirror grayscale. And then I'm also going to set this one to mirror corner as well. And now we're starting to get kind of a snowflake-like effect going on. So now what we can do is we can scale this whole pattern down by using another transform 2D. So I'll get a transform 2D. And if I hit Control and click on this corner, I can scale this. And if I hold down Shift, I can lock this. Now notice it's still repeating. And while that is a really cool effect, you'll see a lot of cool patterns here in this tutorial. What we really want to do is prevent this from repeating. So if I go to the tiling mode under our transformation 2D, click on this select method of inheritance button and choose absolute, and I can say no tiling. And so now we get this black border around here. And really what that does is that gives me these corners. And that's what I'm looking for. So if you want to adjust it some more, double click on the Transform 2D, hold Control, Shift, left click, and you can scale this up and down evenly here. So once you've sized it appropriately, I'm going to use an Edge Detect node. And now I've got some neat parameters here. I can change the edge width and thicken up what it's detecting. It's detecting all of these differences in color, these edges here in these patterns. So I can adjust the roundness, the width. I'm going to bring up the width quite a bit here. 9.53. Now it's just the roundness. 7.58. And then after the edge detect, let's add another invert grayscale. And this makes it so that the shape is now white and the rest is black. So let's continue to make some room. Just going to bring our nodes over to the left. And now I want to add another Transform 2D so that we can scale this down and then rotate it so that it's more like a diamond. So spacebar, Transformation 2D. And now if I click and hold Shift, you can see that we're going to snap to 45-degree angles, which is nice. And then if I hit Control, Shift, and click again, we can uniformly scale this back down. So really all we've done so far is we've taken a shape, we've mirrored it a couple times, we've transformed it a couple times, and we just grabbed an edge detect, inverted it, and then just brought it down. So we have a nice, simple shape in the center of our map here. Let's hit save. And so next up, I'm going to bring in a splatter circular node. And I'm going to connect this Transform 2D to the pattern 1 input. Now you can think of the splatter circular node as a tile generator or tile sampler, but for circular distributions of patterns. You can make all sorts of awesome rounded patterns with this node, including spirals. And in this case, we're going to create a more complex snowflake. So like the tile sampler and tile generator, if you go to our pattern parameters and choose image input, now we're getting our shape in here. So what I want to do now is go down to the size parameters and just increase the scale. Now it's not going to increase enough just with the slider. So what I want to do is I'll just type in 7 and it's going to reset the scale of this scale parameter. And now check out what's going on here. Pretty cool. I can bring this up and down and we're getting a really neat kaleidoscope-like snowflake effect. And this is where you can really customize what kind of snowflake you'd like to make. Now you can customize it even further by going to the very top here where we have pattern amount. And you can increase and decrease the amount of instances that we're tiling here in the splatter circular. So I think I'm going to choose something like 6. You can see as soon as we go from 5 to 6, we're starting to get a really cool optical illusion in our snowflake. Then you can also scroll down to position and adjust the radius to see if you want to adjust this even more. I think I'm going to keep it still at 0.25. Now, next up, I want to create some stems that are pointing out from the sort of divots inside of our snowflake, just to add a little bit more detail and style to our pattern. So I'm going to zoom out here with the scroll wheel. I'm going to bring in another shape. So shape node, and then we're going to stick to square, and this time I'm going to bring down the size X. So we get a thin line here, something like 0.04. And then I'm going to take the angle. I'm going to rotate this so that we have it going on a diagonal here. And I'm going to do it at about 135 degrees. That looks good. Now, the reason I'm aligning it this way is because eventually we're going to use another mirror grayscale node, and it looks for whatever's on the left side, and it's going to mirror it onto the right. So right now I'm just focusing on this top left part. And now that I look at it, I think I'm going to increase the Y a little bit. So I'm going to increase this to 2, and then I'm going to bring it down a little bit. I kind of want this to extend out just a tiny bit. 1.11. And now I'm going to create another shape, and this shape is going to be the center of the stem. This is going to make a lot more sense in a little bit. So bring another shape node, and I'm going to, just like we did before, I'm going to do the same width that we did, so 0.04. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a blend node. And I'm going to put the diagonal in the foreground. I'm also going to put the vertical into the background. I'm going to set the blend mode to add. So here's what happens. If I take this blend now and I bring in a mirror grayscale, you see now we're just mirroring this left side of our shape. So I want to add another diagonal line here. So what I'll do is I'll get a transform 2D. I'll just click on this connection between the shape here with the diagonal and the blend. Get a transform 2D. And now if I double click the blend, but then single click the transform 2D, I can just move this down. So because I want two of these, I'm going to branch off another transform 2D. And we just need to blend these two together. So I've got a blend. I'm going to take these two transform 2Ds, add them. So now I've got two lines. Let me just make some room so we can see what's going on. So if I double click this blend, single click this transform 2D, now I can move this one. And you can see it's starting to poke through at the bottom. So we just need to do what we did before. Go to our tiling mode, absolute, no tiling. We'll do the same thing for this second transform 2D. Absolute, no tiling. Okay, so now if we double click on this blend, we have our two diagonal lines. I can connect this into the foreground of our blend with our stem middle. And now if I look in our mirror grayscale, we're starting to get my desired effect. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the transform 2D up here, move this stem so it's not getting cut off. Single click on the other one, move this one down, and now I can just sort of art direct what I want this particular part of my shape to look like. Okay, so I've just organized a little bit better. So you can see we have a diagonal shape that's getting transformed twice, and we're just blending those two together. Then we're adding that onto our other shape here with this blend and doing a mirror grayscale. We've got our stems. Now we're going to use the same thing we did down here, the splatter circular. So I'll click on my graph, spacebar, splatter circular, and let's put that pattern into the pattern 1 input. Let's make sure that we set this to image input. And so we can see what we're doing. Let's blend these two shapes together. So blend, put the stems in as the foreground, and the rest of our flake in the background. So if I set the blending mode to add, I'm starting to get an idea of what's going on here. We've got two problems though. The first one is our main snowflake is a bit too big, and that really makes it really hard for us to adjust our second problem, which is our stems and our splatter circular. So let's get a transform 2D, put it after our snowflake splatter circular here. So I'll just select that connection, transformation 2D, hold Control Shift, and just drag this down. And if I want to see what I'm doing, but I got to turn off tiling here. So let's go to tiling mode, absolute, no tiling. I'll double click on this blend. And now if I single click on this transform 2D, I can get an idea of kind of how big I want my snowflake to be. So now let's adjust our stem splatter circular here. So I think I want 6 of these stems. And I do need to adjust the radius that we have here. So I'll make these go out further. And they could stick out at the tips here, but I think I want to stick them into these divots. So I'll go down to the rotation parameters. I want to choose the ring rotation. Carefully not doing the pattern rotation. And let me just rotate it so that we're getting these in the middle. 0.29 looks right. Let's bring up the scale of these stems. And then let's go back to our radius and just plop those in. Now that we have the basics of our snowflake shape, I'd like to round it off a little to make it look like it's either been drawn by hand or created with something a little more like glue. To do that, I want to thicken these edges and round off the corners a little with a blur and a histogram scan. So I'll show you what I mean here. If I click on my blend, this is the blend that connects our snowflake to our stems. Hit spacebar, just use a regular blur, and let's bring down the intensity. So now if I add a histogram scan, and I bring up the position and the contrast, I'm going to take the contrast pretty high. Let's go 0.8. And then I can bring up the position even more. Now you can see if I flick between these two, here's what we had before. Here's after the blur and the histogram scan. We've just kind of merged these lines together. These angles become a lot softer. It looks a little bit more like somebody drew this on or we tried to trace a shape with glue. So now let's distribute these snowflakes evenly across our ornament texture. So I'm going to click on my graph and bring in a tile generator. And I know that I want 3 of these snowflakes, so I'll put 3 in the X amount and 0 in the Y. And I can set this pattern to image input and connect our histogram scan to the pattern 1 input. Now they're looking a bit squashed. So let's go down to the interstice X and Y properties. And so by default, the interstice Y and X, if you bring them to the right, they squish this pattern down in the Y or X axis here. So we want it in the Y. Let's get these back to a normal shape. I'm going to do 0.65. Let's bring up the overall scale. 1.17. And let's start previewing this in our 3D view. So we have our final blend already hooked up, connected to our normal ambient occlusion and height. So let's just connect the tile generator into the foreground. We can start to see our snowflakes on our ornament. Now the shadows or the ambient occlusion look really intense. So let's go to our ambient occlusion conversion node and let's change the height depth. That's what controls this shadowing parameter. And so I really think I need to dial down this number even smaller than what I have with this slider. So I'm going to type in a small number like 0.005. I think that's going to be fine. Okay, so we've got our first component down. So what I like to do is take our nodes and kind of align them and then select our component here. So everything that we've created thus far up until the tile generator, hit spacebar and frame them up. I'm going to call this Snowflake. Great. Now let's create a new component. Let's create some wavy lines that go across the top and bottom. It's really easy to do. Let's do it with a waveform node. So I'm just going to make some more room. Click on my graph and spacebar waveform. Waveform 1 is the node. So let's adjust some of these parameters. I'm going to go down to pattern and drag it to the left. So it says pattern 2. Then I'm going to bring up the samples all the way to 1024 and decrease the noise to 0. Now I just need to adjust these size max and size min parameters. For the size min, I'm going to increase it to let's do 0.84. Let's decrease the size max. Let's do 0.48. And then I'm going to go to the wave number and just increase it to, let's do 3. Great. So we've got our main shape here. Now we can do what we did with our snowflake, and we can detect the edges here with an edge detect and isolate those to create our pattern. So I'm going to click on my waveform, spacebar, edge detect. So I'm going to keep it at its default parameters of 2 for the edge width and 4 for the roundness. But what I can do here is, instead of adding an invert grayscale, I can click this invert button. Now, when you use an edge detect, at least in version 10.2 in Substance Designer, you do get these jagged aliased lines. So to soften those up, let's just add a slight blur. So I'm going to add a blur, high quality grayscale, and take down the intensity quite a bit. We really don't need that much. Let's do 0.31, and now if we zoom out, you see it looks totally fine. And then when we start putting this into our height, it's not going to tear our mesh. And now, just like before, let's blend these on. Now I'm starting to create what I call a blend line, and it kind of looks like layers in Photoshop. If you think of them from left to right, you're adding things on top of each other. And this gives me sort of a timeline and lets me understand how the overall substance is being created as the graph gets more and more complex. So what I'm going to do is just select this connection between our snowflake and our final blend and add a new blend. And this automatically puts the snowflake into the background. And I can just take our lines here and put it into the foreground, change the blending mode to add. And now we can see in our 3D view, we've got our wavy lines. You see we don't have any tearing. Looks great. So like before, let's select our component here, spacebar, frame it up, and I'll be original and call it wavy lines. So the next component I want to add is some simple snow, some small circles that represent snow in a really fun way. And I want to keep the snow off of everything that we made so far. So let's make a mask to tell our future tile sampler where it can tile our snow and where it can't. So over here, this is where we're going to make our snow. I'm going to branch a connection off of the blend that we just made that combines the wavy lines with the snowflake. And I'm going to create a blur high quality grayscale. So the intensity of this blur is really going to define how thick our mask is. That'll make sense in a second. So after our blur high quality grayscale, if I click on it and bring in another histogram scan, I take the contrast all the way up to 1 and just bring up the position. You can see now we're making this thick mask based on our blur. So if I leave this position close to 100, let's say 0.97. Now if I go back to this blur high quality grayscale, if I change this intensity, you can see how thick this mask is getting. So I want to leave plenty of space so that we get a little extra room around our shapes. So I'm just going to drag it up to, let's say 11. Is that looking good? Yeah, 11.19. And so a way that a tile sampler is going to use this mask is everywhere that is white is where it can tile, and everywhere that it's black, it will not. So we actually need to invert our mask. Otherwise, we're just going to have our snow right on top of our shapes. So we'll add an invert grayscale after our histogram scan, and let's create our tile sampler. So spacebar, tile sampler. Now we're using a tile sampler because a tile generator doesn't have all of these inputs that we can use. So right away, I'm going to take our invert grayscale and I'm going to bring it into the mask map input of our tile sampler. And so if we double click on the tile sampler, I think 16 by 16 is okay. Let's pick the pattern. I'm going to choose a bell. So I can go down to the size and I can adjust the scale here. I think definitely want it to be smaller. 0.55. Now to see what it is what we're doing, I'm going to scroll down to the color properties. And let's bring up the mask map threshold. That's going to allow this tile sampler to see what's being put into the mask map input. So now you can see we've got this hole in our tile sampler. And what we can do now is I can go to position random and just bring this up and we can kind of adjust where we want our snow to be. But no matter where it goes, it never overlaps with our mask. So I really don't want these dots to overlap each other too much. I'll stick with 1.55 for the position random. And I think that actually might be too much snow. So I can go down to the color properties again, and there's this mask random slider. So I can get rid of a bunch of these if I think it's too much. That looks good, 0.66. So looking at our snow, I think these circles are looking a bit too soft and round. And there's a really easy way to adjust the slope or shape of these circles. We can do that with a curve node. So I'm going to click on the tile sampler, spacebar, bring in curve. And this allows us to adjust this black to white gradient that we're getting. And that's represented here with these two gradients and this curve. So what I'm going to do is double click right in the middle to make a point. And if you notice what's going on over here, if I take this all the way to the left here and then just drag these handles out to make this round, we can sort of thicken up these shapes. So you can adjust these handles and we can really make these look like dots of glue. So I'm just going to adjust my curve a little bit. I think that's looking good. And now let's add this on to our blend line and let's make some room. Let's adjust everything. Take our final blend and our outputs and just bring these over to the right so we've got more space. And then like before, let's select the connection between our last blend here and the final blend. Hit spacebar, add a new one. I'm going to set it to add, and then we'll take the curve and put it into the foreground. And you see we've got our snow here. I kind of like that it has this sort of lip on the side. That makes it feel like it was either stuck on like a sticker or dabbed on with glue. Those imperfections kind of make it seem a little bit more realistic. So what I'm going to do is just select our component, frame it up like we did with the other ones, and call it snow. Now there's one thing I forgot to do. If I go to that blend that we just created to add on our snow, blends have a secret feature. If you scroll down here and you go to the cropping area, I'm noticing if I go to the top of my 3D view here, our snow is getting stretched by the UVs of this circular shape. And so one way to easily get rid of that is just to crop off the top and bottom of our blend. So we can do that with this cropping area. If I take the top, slide it to the right, we can just easily remove the top. And let's do the same thing for the bottom. This time I'll drag it to the left. Make sure not too much. And there we go. An easy way to crop things out without needing another node, just part of the blend. Now let's make some little glittery pieces and scatter them across the design that we just made. So I've made some more room here. Let's start off by dragging a connection from that blend, letting go, and let's bring in a histogram scan. I want to use this to create a really tack sharp mask. So let's bring the contrast all the way up to 1 and the position all the way up to 1. So it's very clean. You know what? I'm noticing I've got a little bit of those snowflakes popping through at the top. So I'm going to go back to my blend, double click that, and let's just bring the top in a tiny bit more. 0.25. And now it's gone. We double click on our histogram scan. So now I've got a really tack sharp mask here. And we're going to use this mask in the same way that we did for our snow, but the opposite. Now I want to tell the tile sampler where exactly I want to put our glitter pieces. And in this case, it's directly on all of our shapes. So let's get another tile sampler. And I'm going to change the pattern to paraboloid. So let's bring up the X and Y amount quite a bit. In fact, let's do a crazy number like 700 by 700. I'm going to bring up the scale. I want these to be a little bit larger, 2.14. And now let's go to the position random and let's strewn these about. Let's zoom in here. You can start to see what we're doing. Position random. You can really pick anything here. I think 2.48 looks perfect. So now let's take our histogram scan of this new mask we made. Let's plug it into the mask map input, just like we did before. And so everywhere that's white is where we're going to distribute these tiles. And so if we go down to the color parameters, bring up the mask map threshold, our glitter is now directly on top of just our shapes. Now, instead of blending it in with just a blend node, I want to stack the glitter on top of our previously established design to make it seem like the glitter has been glued on and the pattern underneath is dried up glue. Now, I've said glue quite a bit in this tutorial. I'm going to be using a height blend node. So clicking in the graph, spacebar height blend. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my previous blend into the height bottom. And then take our glitter here, put it into the height top. And then I'm going to take the blended height, put that into our final blend. Now it's going to look a little weird at first. But if I double click on this height blend and I go to the height offset, this offset slider here, if I bring this to the right or to the left, will raise or lower whatever's plugged into this height top over the height bottom. Just like physical layers. If I bring this up, you can see the glitter is now going to poke through the lower level. So 0.73, that's looking good. And if you look at the height map here, you can see the grayer shade is our lower pattern and the glitter is on top. And we can also see that in our 3D view as well. And so now I'm thinking ahead here because I know we're going to be creating a roughness. And I know that I want to isolate the glitter somehow. So I'm going to create a glitter mask with another histogram scan. And that's going to allow me to just isolate those glitter pieces separately from the underlying pattern. So I'm going to branch a connection off of the tile sampler because that's what has our glitter. And I'll use a histogram scan again. Love using histogram scans to create masks. So like before, contrast all the way up at 1. Let's drag this position up. Now I want to be careful here because if I drag this too high, things just start to blend together. And I really want that detail separating some of these because this texture is in 2K. So we don't have too much resolution to deal with, but just enough. So let's bring up the position. 0.85. That should be fine for what we need. So let's frame up this component and call it glitter. Okay, so there are many kinds of Christmas ornaments. Some are really shiny, others have a little bit of a rougher sheen to them. So my plan for this ornament is to keep the main body of the ornament a little more rough and have a little bit of realistic smudges to them, and then the glitter is going to be much shinier. We have everything we need to isolate all of our pieces, so let's create our roughness now. All right, so to organize a little bit, I'm going to bring the uniform color and base color and also the normal conversion node and the normal output and just bring this up just so we can add some space and get our roughness here. Move this up so we just have a little bit of room to work here. And so what I want to do is I want to create two uniform colors. I'm just going to start from scratch here. So I'm going to delete this uniform color from the template. So spacebar, uniform color, there's one. Let's set it to grayscale. And we can actually just copy and paste this and get two grayscale uniform colors. Now, as roughness works, the darker the color, the shinier the object is. So let's get a blend, connect it to our roughness, and we'll take the top and put it into the foreground, bottom into the background. And now we need something in the opacity input of this blend to determine where either of these two colors shine through. Luckily, we have a mask for this already that we created, and that's our glitter mask here. So in our glitter component, we created that histogram scan branching from the tile sampler. Let's drag a connection from that and put that into the opacity input of our blend. So the top one here, that's going to be our glitter. So if I bring this up, see we're adjusting the roughness of our glitter, and if I adjust the bottom one here, that's the rest of our ornament. So I'm actually going to start with the rest of our ornament. So this bottom uniform color, let's dial this in. How about 0.33? And then for the top for the glitter, I want it to be much shinier. So let's just decrease this a little bit. 0.23. Now if I Control Shift right click, I can see what's going on. It's looking pretty good. Next up, I want to add a little bit of variation to create some realism here, just some smudges that go along the shiny part of our ornament. So I'm going to take these nodes that we just created, bring them over, and select the connection here between the roughness output and that blend. Spacebar, add another blend. It's going to automatically put that previous blend into the background. And so in the foreground, I'm just going to drag out a connection, and we're going to use a moisture noise. So if I double click our new blend and just bring down the opacity, I can fade in this moisture noise. So let's drag this to about 0.21. And now if I Control Shift and right click to move my light, you can see this reflection highlight here, just a little extra bit of roughness and detail. And when it really shines, no pun intended, is when we turn on the metallic or metal channel here. So if I go to the uniform color, select that. This is a fully metal material, so all the way to 1. Now we have a metallic looking ornament. We're getting really cool roughness as I adjust this highlight. And you can start to see our ornament here coming to life. So let's keep organized. I'm just going to select everything we've made for a roughness, frame it up, call it roughness. And I like to make these kind of frames a different color, so I'll just choose a dark red. Just move it over like that. Now I've got one more part to do, and that is the color. So we're going to do something similar with our Albedo color map. So let's get that 2 uniform colors and a blend like we did before. So spacebar, uniform color, and I'm going to keep it to color as the mode. We can duplicate it by hitting Control D, or you can hit Control C, Control V like we did before to copy and paste. And so we're going to blend these two together. Foreground, background. And this time we need to create a new mask for our opacity. And we're going to get that from our height blend here. So let's branch off a connection from our height blend. I'm just going to let go up here and bring another histogram scan. We're targeting all of our shapes, everything involved, We want to keep the rest of our sphere a different color. So let's take that histogram scan, bring up the position, bring up the contrast. Let's adjust some of these a little bit so I can see what's going on. Pretty high here. Let's go 0.91 for the contrast and 0.72 for the position. Should be fine. And now let's put that histogram scan into this blend here for our colors. So let's talk about our colors here. It's important to know that when you're dealing with metal colors, the color range that you use is much more limited to keep within the PBR guidelines. Luckily, Substance Designer has a node to help us out, and we'll use that in a second. Now, I tend to make sure that my colors aren't too saturated and have a higher value than non-metal colors. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I go to my bottom uniform color here, this is going to be the majority of our ornament. If I go over to red, and now let me connect this blend to our base color and get rid of the uniform color. You can see we've got this really deep saturated red. It looks very unrealistic. So we'll go to the uniform color. Let's take down the value, take down the saturation. We can really fine tune this. Let's go with something like that. It's a bit more orange when you look at it in the graph, but I think you'll see it turns out a bit more red when we render it out. And so now let's adjust what the glitter and the rest of our patterns look like. I'm just going to take this value, bring it up. And I don't want it to be fully white. 0.83 on the value looks good. And now we have our glitter with our shape and our red ornament. We can get a green one, any kind of color you want. I think I'm going to stick with the red for now. So let's select this as our component, frame, call it Albedo color. Now there's one more thing that's really important about the Albedo color. Like I said before, there's a node that Substance Designer has to help us out here with metals and keeping everything within the guidelines. So if I select this connection here, spacebar, let's find the PBR Albedo safe color node. You can see it says PBR workflow, we're using base color metallic instead of diffuse specular. So what this needs is a metallic input. So let's go back here. This is the uniform color that we're using to define our metallic values. So I'm actually going to select this uniform color, frame it up, and call it metallic. And I'll just color it something like purple. We're going to connect that to the PBR Albedo safe color metallic input here. You might have seen a slight difference in the color change there. It just kind of pops it into place so that we have the safe metallic diffuse base color, all the big words, values, so that they all match up correctly and look great. Very handy. So if I zoom out here, this is what our graph looks like. And we'll do a quick rundown. So we start off by building a snowflake. You can build all kinds of snowflakes, any kind of shape. Just kind of want to show you what it's like to build a quick, neat kind of kaleidoscope-like shape in Substance Designer, especially using the splatter circular node. Really cool. And we created some wavy lines, added some snow by some little specks, and we used the blur and histogram scan to create a mask for the mask map input in the tile sampler. Used a curve to adjust those shapes to thicken them a little bit. And then we added some glitter by creating a mask and doing another tile sampler, just to add some small specks that are going to catch the highlights from the light. Then we added some roughness with a little bit of detail in our moisture noise, and then chose the proper colors here with our Albedo color frame, and made sure that they were Albedo safe with our metallic values. Plug that into base color, and you've got a simple Christmas ornament. This material really shows off when you put it in a render engine like Marmoset or Redshift, which is what I've used for the renders in this video. If you're looking for more holiday material fun, in my Fabric Essentials wool training series, which I'll put a link down below and also up there, In one of the lessons that we do, we create what's commonly known as the ugly Christmas sweater, where you can knit any pattern or image into a wool fabric texture, and it's really fun. Check it out if you're interested. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. It lets me know that you like seeing tutorials like these. And if you'd like to see more videos, hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I post new videos. Now, I've got some really fun stuff coming up. I've got this new series that I'm working on that I'm really excited to create, but also share with you. So until then, I'm Jeremy Steiner. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Now, let's make some glittery pieces and splatter them wrong along. So many outtakes in this, I'll tell you. A little bit of realistic smudges on the shiny part, and then have the glitter be much more shiny. Oh, so good until I couldn't say the word shiny. Shiny, shiny, shiny? Oh, I've got 7 minutes on this card. Marmoset or Redshift, which is what I've done in the renders that you've seen in this video so far. There's a fly. There's a fly. It's tough recording this today. I don't know why.